Well, good morning. It's so good to see all of y'all. I feel like this is kind of the beginning of after summer, finally. Hope y'all had a good one. It was fast. I don't know that I even felt it, but it was good. And I'm so grateful that we have come to this day to deal with House Resolution 641 and take a strong look at children's mental health in the state of Georgia. I'm Katie Dempsey, privileged to be sitting in this seat, and I think I know most everyone in the room. If I haven't, I want to meet you because I know that you have some very heartfelt concerns in this arena. I'd like to start off, first of all, by allowing the committee to introduce themselves and tell a little bit about who you are and what brought you to this conversation. So, Representative Garner, are you where you could do that to start us off?
I'm Representative Pat Gardner. I have a long interest in mental health resulting probably from years of working with the Psychological Association. Very pleased to be appointed to this committee and to be working with Representative Dempsey and other advocates for children, particularly for their mental health. So thank you very much for being here. I represent the city of Atlanta, where our needs for children are enormous.
I'm Joyce Chandler, and I would almost ditto what Pat has said, because no matter where we are, when we're working with children, we're working with all kinds of issues. My background is school counseling. I was a school counselor for 31 years and did some private therapy work. And so I have a heart for children and for mental health issues, and I too am grateful to be here. And it's good to see so many of you that I know. Thank you for being here.
And I'm Rick Jaspers from Jasper up in the beautiful mountains. And those that are sitting out there that probably don't know me, they're probably thinking, what's he doing here?
We're glad to have you.
Yeah, what's he doing here? But yeah, you have to know my background, and I worked with youth my entire career as a county agricultural agent. I work with 4-H'ers and youth development, and I always have an interest of what goes on with kids and youth, and you'll see that in what I do and what I talk about. And I just appreciate I get the opportunity to be here and learn from y'all.
Thank you so much. And sitting next to me is Roma Amin, the real brains behind everything we all try to do. Her expertise is very important to this conversation. Representative Randy Nix could not be here because of another committee meeting, I think with Natural Resources, but he very much looks forward to being with us as we continue this study. Okay, so if I could, in your information there is a copy of the resolution, and let's just take a minute to look at that and focus on it. I'm sure that each of you are familiar with it, but we are really concerning ourselves with early intervention and the prevention of mental health problems in children and adolescents. I'm a big believer in early intervention at any level. I think those problems that are big become giant later in life. So the sooner we can engage and diagnose and appropriately treat and direct what is sometimes considered behavior, but is often a true mental health diagnosis. We want to look at that. Of course, we'll be looking at funding, and also feel that this is very beneficial to the issue to look at available resources for children and to identify possible solutions or improvements in the delivery of services, particularly concerning early intervention and prevention services, as I said. So I know that many of you have been engaged in that for a long time and care deeply about it. I want to affirm to each of you that this is a conversation. We will have at least 3, maybe 4 more meetings. As we go through this, though, I want our panel and everyone here to feel like you can ask questions of any of our presenters, but also as you hear this, if you are aware of someone whose expertise and experience we need to bring into this conversation as we move forward, I want you to please feel like you can get in touch with me, any of our fellow members up here, and Roma also, to let us please know what what we can all do to make most effective this time that we've been afforded by the Speaker of the House to gather and serve and really look at it. Will it be a beginning? Absolutely. This is such a huge conversation, but it is important at this time, I think, to begin that. So, if everyone is ready, and I will say just a little bit of housekeeping too, also to the committee. If you look on the information here, and if there's any information that's incorrect or that we need to update or any other better way to reach you most effectively, please get in touch with me or Roma or Sam in my office, and let's try to do that. So we will start today with our first presenter, Gary McGibney, the Deputy Superintendent of External Affairs for our Department of Education. And Gary comes to us with so much experience. We worked together particularly on the broader scope of mental health on the study committee that met 2 years ago, I believe. So Gary, I'd love for you to start off just a little bit too with telling us a little more about yourself as well.
Thank you, ma'am. Madam Chair and other members of the committee, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm Gary McGibney. I'm Deputy Superintendent for Policy at the Georgia Department of Education. But I'm also a school psychologist, and also a family member of mine has received mental health services from the time she was a baby up till even now as an adult. So I'm a consumer of mental health services as well. Today I want to talk to you about really 5 sections of my presentation. The first, I want to talk about national data, and then we'll talk about local data. We'll talk about resources for children, some impacts on children, and also finally with some recommendations. To give you the national perspective, 1 in 5 children birth to 18 has a diagnosable mental health problem. And you have the PowerPoint there, and you'll see the references if you want to look those up. 1 in 10 children has serious mental health problems that are serious enough to impair how they function at home or in school or in the community. The onset of major mental illness occurs as early as 7 to 11 years of age. And roughly half of all long-term mental health problems start by the mid-teens. Looking at more data related to mental health in children, 14%, now as we're going into the impact on school, 14% of children with mental health problems receive mostly D's and F in their schoolwork. 44% of children with mental health problems drop out of high school. 10% of high school dropouts were attributable to mental health problems. 21% of low-income children aged 6 to 17 have mental health problems. In the course of the school year, research shows that many children with mental health problems miss as many as 18 to 22 days of school. I'll add parenthetically, research we've done with 1.7 million children in the state of Georgia shows that absences start impacting learning after the 6th day of absence, regardless of the cause of absence. So look at that with 18 to 22 days, and you see the impact of mental health. I also wanted to show you this. 32% of children of military families scored high risk of mental health problems. That's 2.5 times higher than the national average. And I point that out because Georgia has 30,000 military-connected children in our public schools. That's at least 30,000. We developed a military-connected student identifier 3 years ago, and we're still trying to make sure that we're getting those accurately identified, but I would say it's at least 30,000. It could be more than that. And there's a higher prevalence of mental health problems in youth age 11 to 17 in military-connected families. And I'm going to talk about an example of what we're doing about that a little bit later. This is really probably the main reason why we're here today is 75 to 80% of children in need of mental health services do not receive them. That's an incredible number that should disturb all of us. 37 to 52% of adolescents and young adults who were hospitalized for suicide attempt received mental health services in the prior month. And only 29% of children expressing suicide ideation in the prior year received mental health services. We have a major issue. I wanted to also show you this. A student's unmet mental health needs impact a lot of things. The student academics, their careers and socio-emotional development, as well as compromises school safety. Schools are often the first place where mental health crisis and mental health needs of children are recognized. Typically, that's in the school. And look at the last bullet, which really stuns a lot of people, so much so that they sometimes challenge me on this, and we refer them to the research because it's been replicated many times. Of school-aged children who receive any mental health services, 70 to 80% of that is at school. So we're going to have to improve and expand the mental health services at the school, since that's where they receive most of their services. It doesn't end there, of course, but we have to recognize that reality. That was the national data. I'll talk about Georgia's data. In 2013, there was a concerted effort by a number of professionals to come up with some indicators that we could look at to determine the mental health status of children. And it was an extensive study. There was a grant issued by the National Institute of Mental Health in collaboration with Columbia University's REACH, which is Resources for Advancing Children's Health. They did extensive research, did focus groups across the nation. They came up with 11 indicators that would indicate if a student has mental health problems or is at risk for mental health problems. The final wording of those indicators, as you can see by this list, was recognized and approved by a number of recognized entities, associations, and professionals. We are so concerned about the mental health issues that we took that research and took those indicators and embedded those indicators into the Georgia Student Health Survey so that we can have a baseline, at least, of mental health issues with our students in Georgia. Now, you know, you're probably familiar with the Georgia Student Health Survey. It's been given to students anonymously for 9 years now, and it's part of one of the metrics in the school climate rating that all schools now receive across the state of Georgia. And it covers things like school safety, nutrition, school climate, and a number of issues. We embedded those mental health components into the middle and high school survey. Over 629,000 students took the survey. That's a pretty darn good sample. It's the largest mental health sample survey in the United States. Now, the spreadsheet and the results are massive, but I want to just focus on these 4 areas. The number of students who considered harming themselves more than 5 times was 32,435. Now, if you look at these percentages, some would say, well, that's not a very high percentage, but look at the numbers, because when you look at the numbers, those are individual children. The number of students who attempted to harm themselves more than once, 24,686. The number of students who on more than 5 occasions, experienced intense worries or fears that interrupted their daily activities, 51,000, almost 52,000 children. The number of students who on more than 5 occasions experienced drastic changes in behavior or personality, almost 54,000 students. So you see, as you said, Madam Chair, we have a lot of work to do. The next session, I'm going to talk about some strategies and at the end, some recommendations. I want to go over some things that we're trying to do at the state level and across the state. Starting with suicide prevention, because you saw the numbers, over 52,000 students had thought about harming themselves, and many of them had attempted. In May of this year, the governor signed House Bill 198, the chair's bill, the Jason Flatt Act, and it basically addresses the issues of making sure that our educators are aware of the symptoms of a student who may have suicide ideation or is leading up to that. In other words, students who may be in trouble. Keeping in mind now the previous slide showing that if it's going to be manifest, it's going to be manifest in the school, most likely. It was an extensive bill and a specific bill, and many of the people in the audience here, we all took it to heart and jumped on it immediately. The bill requires a state model policy for suicide awareness, prevention, intervention, and postvention, and that has been developed. It's been developed, published, and distributed to every school system in Georgia. The bill also requires training sessions for educators. So representatives from the Georgia Department of Education, BHDD, the Society for Prevention of Teen Suicide, and other experts put the training together, and it's already scheduled. We have 5 training sessions in September. It's the same week as Suicide Prevention Week. We thought that would be a good way to publicize it. And we already have over 1,000 people signed up for the training, and that number will grow because we've encouraged school systems to bring not just an individual, but to bring a team to the training. And then they redeliver the training when they go back to their school system. I also want to talk about a federal grant that we received. We applied for a federal grant, Project AWARE. It's a 5-year grant, and Georgia did receive the grant. Project AWARE, which stands for Advancing Wellness and Resilience Education, it builds the capacity of the state and local education agencies to increase awareness of mental health issues. And one of the key components of this is the youth mental health first aid training provided to educators across the state. We had to identify 3 school systems for the focus of the grant, and that's Muskogee, Newton, and Spalding County. But the grant allows us to do the training beyond just those 3 school systems. So far already, and we just received the grant just a few months ago, we've already have 40 youth mental health first aid instructors. They have been trained as instructors. We have 338 first aiders have been trained in the youth mental health first aid, with 200 more scheduled for August and September. We've already started that. So we'll have well over 500 pretty soon. And as I said, the training includes universal early screening as well. And as you recall, Chair and other members of the committee, that was one of the recommendations of the 2013 House Study Committee on Mental Health Access. So we're doing that. Also, we've developed mental health referral process for those 3 local school systems to hopefully use as a model for the state to help streamline the process of referral from school to community. And this is also important. We're developing a data collection sharing agreement with all the agencies that work with students or children with mental health issues. So Project AWARE is enabling us to implement some strategies and resources that will directly help children with mental health problems, but also we hope it'll be a framework for something that we can build into the state's strategy over time. We're also developing through Project AWARE agreements with the private mental health providers outside of the school setting and providing professional development on issues such as complex trauma. You'll hear me talk about school climate a little bit later, but we also want the schools to be complex trauma-informed schools, so the staff will know the difference, for example, between defiant behavior and symptomatic behavior. Your response to the behavior is going to be drastically different if you think it's defiant behavior as opposed to symptomatic behavior. Also, we're implementing positive behavior intervention supports as a framework for improving school climate, and I'll talk about that more later. And if you recall, that was also a recommendation of the 2013 House Study Committee on Mental Health Access. Part of Project AWARE's Source of Strength program, which is a mental health wellness program aimed to enhance coping and social support for students. And also part of that that's important is it trains students and teaches students that it's okay to ask for help. For them to understand that some of the things they're going through, they will need help with. And it's okay to ask for help. Now that sounds simple, but it's not. Many of, particularly pre-adolescent and adolescent kids, are reluctant to ask for help. They don't know how to. We don't have very many doors. We don't encourage them to do that as much as we should, and so we're working on that as well. Let me shift also to another project going on now in Georgia. APEX, or GAP, is a pilot project with the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities Office of Children, Youth, Young Adults, and Families. They're providing services and funds, or providing funds to the 24 CSBs so that they can hire licensed mental health clinicians that will be school-based. School-based, with, again, going back to that slide that shows where students receive services will be in the school. It'll provide greater access to the mental health services for children and youth as well as the families, but also it will work very well with Project Aware, the one I just mentioned before, in the blending of services and blending of processes and the blending of concepts. Those two work very well together. So think about the potential strength of a strategy that has all the elements of both those projects, Project Aware and the Apex project. We're talking about building a very strong strategy. Another strategy is, and you've heard me say this probably many times, and if people in the room know me, they've heard me talk about school climate. Positive school climate is essential for the health of our children. And you can see the research that we'll quote there. A positive school climate mitigates the negative effects of self-criticism, improves a wide range of emotional and mental health outcomes, increases student self-concept, lowers levels of drug abuse, reduces psychiatric problems among high school students, and increases psychological well-being. Now think about it this way. If a student that has issues, let's say a student is dealing with depression, and they come to a school that's unstable, unhealthy, non-supportive, non-responsive, in other words, they don't feel like anybody even cares that they're there. What does that do for a child who's facing the shadow of depression? Children with mental health problems need environments that establish those elements of safety and stability and support, and we know that the positive outcomes from that. Children with mental health problems struggle in an unsafe school climate. They struggle. And Mental Health America did research to confirm that. So what is the best framework for improving school climate? Well, we did research a few years ago, and everything that pointed to was PBIS, Positive Behavior Interventions and Supports. It's in about 25,000 schools around the United States. It's endorsed by the United States Department of Education, SAMHSA, and almost all the professional associations that work with children or work with schools. And it's a proactive approach to establishing a positive mental health climate and a culture in the school that supports students. And when we embarked on the effort to improve school climate through PBIS, we were, I think, wise enough to say we can't do this. This cannot be DEO owned and operated. Frankly, we're not that smart enough to do that, and we don't have the resources to do that. And if you're talking about something that's going to be more than just a project, but it should be population-based and it should be sustainable, then it should be decentralized. So we got a group together, and you can see the list here of all the stakeholders, including members of your committee, and came up with a statewide school climate plan and then how to implement positive behavior interventions and supports. And we did decentralize it so that every one of the 16 RESAs, the Regional Education Service Agencies in Georgia, has a school climate specialist. We pushed it out to the local schools. And we were able to fund the school climate specialists in each of the RESAs only because the governor added to the budget, and then this past session the legislature added some money to allow us to do that. And you'll see later that I will ask for another expansion of that. So far in Georgia we have over 350 schools implementing PBS, which is in 50 school districts, but more importantly, or just as important, we now have 28 school districts lined up saying we want that too. That's a 100% increase in schools with PBS in just 3 years. I don't like having capacity issues, but this time this is a welcome capacity issue because we will try to conform to the need. When we talk about mental health in children, there are a couple of things I'm going to mention today that we typically don't talk about. Social and emotional learning is a process through which children and adults acquire and effectively apply the knowledge and attitudes and skills necessary to understand and manage emotions and social interaction. This is the development of social language. And we can do this in the schools. So research supports SEL. It's been done across the nation. We have it now in 18 school districts. It involves teacher training, and people pause sometimes when I mention that, but the response from the teachers has been overwhelmingly positive. because it's part of what they do. It deals with the classroom climate itself. It deals with interaction and how to interact with children in a learning way, but also it supports social learning. It supports social language. In fact, it's so well thought of in some states, for example, Illinois, their statewide children's mental health law includes SEL. That's how powerful it is. So with the experts, we went and found the experts and didn't have to go very far because one of the nation's leading experts is Emily Rubin at the Marcus Center. And Emily is now working with 18 school systems, and her team is working with those school systems. This blends beautifully with school climate improvement. SEL and PBS work hand in glove, and it works very well together. In fact, PBS, when you improve the school climate, the next logical step is SEL, because improving school climate is not the end game. That's just the beginning. And we tell schools all the time, and I'll tell everybody here, improving school climate is not the end game. That's just the beginning. You now have created a climate where good things can take place. So take advantage of that and do good things. In SEL, we hope to expand that. We're getting requests for that to be expanded. We have some grant money from the Marcus Center to help us with that, but that needs to be discussed. And it links very well with everything else I've talked about, with Project Aware, the GAP project, with PBIS. All this linkage is starting to come together that I hope you see. Reminding you again of the note earlier that 70 to 80% of children receive mental health services is going to be at school. We have to talk about what services do we have at the school. School counselors provide and respond to the need for mental health and behavioral prevention, early intervention as well. And you'll see on this chart that the American School Counselors Association recommends a counselor to student ratio of 1 to 450. In Georgia, we're 1 to 500. Also, school psychologists play a different role because they're primarily into the identification and consultation of mental health services and needs of children. And you'll see on this chart that the National Association of School Psychologists recommends a school psychologist to student ratio of 1 to 1,000. Georgia is 1 to 2,475. We have a long way to go, again, for the mental health services that our children need in schools. School social workers play an essential role with the school, at the school, but also they're the linkage to the family and to the community. They play a vital role. And you can see the ratio there in Georgia. We only have 620 school social workers in the entire state. So the ratio of social workers to students is 1 to 2,742. And look at the recommendation of the American Association of School Social Workers, 1 to 250. The next few slides, I'm going to talk about areas that we don't normally talk about related to children's mental health. The first is school nurses. You seldom hear school nurses brought into the conversation about children's mental health. But look at the third bullet there. The top 5 health conditions of children in the United States are mental health problems. And school nurses spend 32% of their time providing mental health services. Think of it this way. If a child has depression or is a victim of complex trauma, how does that manifest in the school? A stomach ache. And who do they seek for assistance when a child has a stomach ache? They don't go to the counseling office. They go to the school nurse. So the school nurse is the first one can be the first one to do that early screening. For example, I spoke to the school nurses a couple of years ago about recruiting them to be the first one to diagnose bullying, the victim of a bully. Because typically a child, particularly males, don't like to admit they're being bullied, but they'll manifest the symptoms physically and they'll go to the nurse with a stomach ache or a headache or something like that. So we told the school nurses, if you keep seeing the same child, it may be a medical condition, obviously, but if it's not, and that's been confirmed, look at other possibilities. What is that symptomatic of? So we want to recruit and include school nurses in our school setting as mental health providers and screeners for our children as well, not just the counselors, social workers, school psychologists. We need to include the school nurses. To do that, we'll need 700 more school nurses to meet the recommendation of the ratio of 1 to 750. That's doable. All this is doable. Now, you're really going to think that I'm really departing from the typical conversation about mental health, but ladies and gentlemen, no effective change has ever taken place without first changing the conversation. And we need to change the conversation, or we're going to continue to have the same conversation every 2 or 3 years. There's a linkage in mental health and literacy. And there's research to show that. Now, this research, let me caution you, is not causation research. It's correlation research. But the research is so strong, the correlation is so strong, we can't ignore it. And let me put it in these terms. If you have a student in the 6th grade who's pre-adolescent going into those issues, physiological issues, psychological changes of pre-adolescence and adolescence, and they can't read, or they're reading at the 3rd grade level and they're in the 6th or 7th grade. What takes a beating? Self-concept. What interferes with productive social interaction and language development? The lack of reading. For kids, the therapists in the room will know that one of the most effective treatments for children with mental health issues is bibliotherapy, reading. I'll give you a quick example. A friend of mine's child is 10 years old, and the family dog is, he came home from the hospital, and there was the family dog. Well, the dog recently died, and the child was traumatized. I mean, sank into deep depression. Otherwise, very functional child became dysfunctional at school. And the teacher picked up on it and talked to the parent and said, "Can you tell me what's going on?" And she told him. And she said, let me give him this book, because he's a good reader. It's called Dog Heaven. I don't know if you've ever seen it. But therapists use it around the world for children who are going through the grieving process, particularly if they've lost a pet. Now, we think that's maybe a minor issue for a child, but to lose a pet that's been part of the family their entire life, that's a major mental health crisis. But if the child can't read, then that's one avenue of mental health services that's cut off. So I'll talk about literacy because it's so important to the development of children and even adults. So much so that the Department of Education, we've linked with the Get Georgia Reading campaign to link all these things together, because language, reading, climate, and mental health are inseparable. And too often we have looked at them in isolation of each other. We'll have a reading program, we'll talk about counselors, we'll talk about mental health, and we'll talk about them separately. Well, I'm suggesting humbly to this committee that we stop doing that we start looking for linkages. And I'm not saying these are all the linkages that I'm talking about. These are some of the ones that we're familiar with and trying to recognize. This group here on this slide will see the list of all the people that came together in 2013 to develop a common agenda for the state of Georgia to address not only the literacy issue, but all those components related to that, and that includes mental health. All these experts came together and developed the 4 pillars that actually can be used as funding priorities for a number of things, not just reading, but also like mental health. Language, nutrition. A child who doesn't develop adequate language as a baby or before they get to school, they're already behind, and they're not only behind academically, they're already behind socially. So we have planted the seed for mental health issues already. And then school climate, I've talked about that, what that does or can do. Teacher effectiveness, teacher preparation and effectiveness, how they interact with children, that can be self-reinforcing for children to feel accepted and have a positive exchange. And access to not only mental health services, but access to all the things that we've talked about before, including language. So I know I'm running out of time. Here are our recommendations. Expand PBS to provide a full-time school climate specialist at the RESAs. They're really part-time. We don't really have enough funding for them to be full-time. But also, that would allow us to reach out into the pre-K community. Now this is Gary speaking, this is not the official position of the DOE. We need to be talking about pre-K through 12 instead of K-12. Because so many of the kids in preschool are benefiting, and decal to their everlasting credit, they've embraced PBS in the early learning centers as well, because we realize that early learning is important before they get to kindergarten. So that would allow us to expand the school climate specialists into the preschools in the RESA districts, expand social and emotional learning training to more school systems. I told you the value of SEL and how that can impact the development of mental health development, and also let's extend that into pre-K. We know that language development, teacher preparation, and access to social language has a lot to do with a child's mental health. And let's use Project Aware and Project Apex as our sustainability strategy for providing services in the schools and link that to services in the community. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a good framework of strategy, but it's got to be more than just a grant project that ends in 5 years or ends in 2 years. We can learn a lot from this that is sustainable and transferable to the entire state if we have the chance and the will to do that. Continue efforts to increase the number of school nurses and reduce the counselor ratio, school psychologist ratio, and the school psychologist ratio. I want to mention just one other thing before I close, and that is access. All of these areas are related to access. And too often we have a discussion about access that's binary. We either have the services or we don't. Access is not a binary discussion. You may have the services, but nobody can get to the services, or they can't afford the services, or maybe the language difference doesn't make it available. There are a number of components. In fact, the Georgia Tech Humanitarian Logistics Center defines 6 components of access. And I'll give you an example of what we need to think of as far as access is this. We have 30,000 military-connected children in Georgia. At Fort Stewart, they have a child psychiatrist. But Liberty County School System doesn't have access to that child psychiatrist. We know how few child psychiatrists are in the state of Georgia. Very few. Well, I met with Dr. Paul Bann in the U.S. Army's office. He's over what they call MedCom, the MedCom office, and we talked about this, and he said, Gary, what are you asking me to do? I said, what I'm asking you to do is make that child psychiatrist available to Liberty County School System. He said, we're going to work on that. That's access. So we need to look at those points of possible access around the state in addition to these elements here, and perhaps keep in mind, if you will, those 4 pillars give us not only a good starting place, also a good metric to measure how well we are moving toward providing more services for our children who need mental health services. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Excellent presentation. Are there any questions or comments from the committee?
I just have to say, this is a wonderful insight into how the education department could really impact on children's mental health issues. Lots of things I have lots of questions. I think I'll probably ask most of them offline, but one of the things I've heard from social workers is that they have very clearly defined roles by their school systems that makes it inappropriate for them to go beyond just saying this child has a problem and maybe creating a diagnosis, but not being able to provide any clinical services, and they may have been trained to provide clinical services. Is that accurate, or? That's accurate, and it's our collective fault. It's our collective fault, because we're not reaching out far enough in the training of administrators and teachers and parents
and other providers, what is the role of the social worker? What is the role of the school counselor? What is the role of the school psychologist? What is the role of the school nurse? We've got to do a better job of linking all of them together, because that's a perfect example. This is your job. This is all you do right here.
Right. We need to look at those barriers, and I wondered, is that a regulatory thing that's from the State Department, from a local school system, or is it just a resource issue?
Yes, yes, and yes.
Okay. Oh,
You asked three
okay.
questions.
Well, we
and
brought,
the answer to all three is yes, but that's something that we can address as long as we go. We've got to get away from this isolation idea of services. CSB does this, the social worker does this, the reading teacher does this, the literacy project is this, the school. Unless we get away from that and start blending what we're doing and let that be part of not only the conversation but part of the training, and not, I started to say part of a goal, but I don't know about you, but I'm kind of tired of goals. Let's move to expectations. I mean, does Delta have a goal to land its plane safely?
No. They're not going to try.
Well, why don't we have an expectation of all these working together? That needs to be a state expectation, not a goal.
Well, I'm interested in what's going on all over the state, but one of the things that sort of came to my mind since I've been working a lot in Fulton mental health is how some of these grants that go to CSBs can impact on the city of Atlanta and Fulton schools. And I hope that you will come and talk to the Fulton County focused committee on how we might better do that.
Well, we've been invited, and this is a good thing. We're being invited to do presentations all over the state. In fact, I've been in front of all the juvenile court judges, and from that, we now are doing a regional school justice summits where we're talking about many of these issues with the idea that we can coalesce a lot of our resources together and not have any barriers.
Thank you.
Representative Chandler.
Thank you, Dr. McGivney. We appreciate this wealth of information. I'm interested in the GAP program and the behavioral health staff that's going to be school-based. Do we already have this in place?
We have some of it in place, and Matt Yancey is here from BHDD, and he's the one who's been the director of that program. So I would defer to Matt to answer specific questions about it. Matt's been great to work with, just fabulous to work with, because it was necessary to merge the Project Aware, which is a DOE grant, federal grant, with the efforts of the GAP project. So I would defer to Matt to talk more about it.
Okay, thank you.
And Matt will be our next presenter. Representative Jaspers.
So I have to forgive some not knowing some of these answers. I just got curiosity, Doctor, on improving school climate. We all of us go into different schools and had kids in them and all that good stuff, but how do y'all rate that? I saw on page 10 or where you have all these different criteria, but do y'all have a score, or is it something you go in there and you feel, or you look at how does a parent know that they've got a good one, or how does a school system know they need to improve?
Good question. First of all, let me back up. In 2011, the Georgia legislature passed a bill. It's in Title 20-13-40. 14-33. The states that the Department of Education must develop a school climate rating. We frankly encouraged that legislation because we wanted it to be embedded as an expectation in Georgia of school climate, so that change of administration would not affect that. Let's let the leadership come to the expectation instead of the other way around, because as you know, every change in leadership, they have their own goals. School climate is too important to be set as a goal. It should be an expectation. So with that bill in place, we started working on developing a way to measure school climate. We already had the Georgia Student Health Survey, as I mentioned earlier. We created, in addition to that, a parent survey and a school staff survey. So there are 4 components of the school climate rating, and the rating scale is on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being not very good and 5 being very good. One quarter of that is the results of the surveys: the student survey, the parent survey, and the school staff survey. Another component of that is attendance, student attendance and staff attendance. The third component of that is discipline data from the school system reporting their discipline data. And we weigh the consequences. It's a weighted scale of their consequences and how those are weighted into the metric, and that's the third part. And the fourth part is that Georgia State University, University of Georgia, and Emory helped us go into the student survey and pick out those components that have the highest correlation directly to school safety. And when they identified those in research, that's the fourth component. So all those metrics, this enormous amount of data, are all woven together to come up with a school climate rating of a scale of 1 to 5 for all 2,634 schools in Georgia. This year, for the first time, got a school climate rating of 1 to 5. That generated a lot of discussion, and it generated a lot of interest in school climate, and that's a good thing.
So I guess that's available on the DOE. If you want to look up your particular school, you could do that.
That's right.
On also, Madam Chair, if I can, on your 4 pillars thing, I guess, you know, we've talked about telemedicine and rural health care, and, you know, I'm on the health committee also, and, you know, I know you would like to have psychiatrists, psychologists in every school. I mean, but may or may not be practical or affordable. But have y'all pursued, I mean, have school systems pursuing telemedicine to do these evaluations or help?
Yes, we've had, excuse me, we've had meetings with Medicaid, and telemedicine has come up. CHOA, Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, is using telemedicine in some of the rural areas, and including some of their psychologists are using telemedicine in the schools now. So that's an area that's rich for expansion, and that goes to the access pillar of those 4 pillars. That's access. Because we know that we're not going to have a psychologist in every school every day. We know that. I mean, we have, 13 counties in Georgia that don't even have a dentist. So we know that there's a practical side of access, but that shouldn't stop us. It shouldn't be the binary, as I said earlier, discussion of yes, we have it, or no, we don't. There's something in between. So looking and exploring all those elements that you're talking about, like with telemedicine, but also looking at what resources in those communities that have access problems may have use of utilities that are close to them, like the RESAs, the Technical College System of Georgia. Those are 2, and the health departments. Those are all very strategically located, but their lines of service are not the same. So if we could even look at how our lines of services are drawn, maybe we'd be able to coalesce some of those services to address the access issues.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Representative Gardner.
The telemedicine, the telepsychiatry issue is a really interesting one for us to explore, and I'm not sure that this is Dr. Givney's necessarily initiative, but I visited the telemedicine project at CHOA Hospital. Very impressed with the technology, and after we looked at people's ears and throats and things, and I saw how clearly the telemedicine was, I asked them about referrals, and they said 75% of their referrals, this is CHOA, one provider, were for psychiatry. And they told me at that time, this was 2 years ago, they had 1 psychiatrist at the Marcus Center, and that the waiting was 6 months. Now, for a child in crisis, that's so. Madam Chairwoman, I would like to explore that a little bit more and see if we can enhance that network.
It's certainly not my area of expertise, but I will have one comment on that, and that is that there's some early research showing that a lot of children respond well to telemedicine because they're used to the computer screen.
Any other questions? Well, Dr. McGivney, you have started us off very well. Dr. McGivney does have another commitment. I know he has a busy schedule every day. It has been a privilege to work beside you, and I think each of us, I've kind of heard the gasps up here at moments, are pleasantly surprised at much of the work and coordinated effort that is going on. And I think that's something we have to bear in mind. At times it may seem like nothing is happening, but there is a lot of work. And I would like to thank you personally from the suicide prevention standpoint to see this come to life so quickly and be so very important, not only to the department, but to each and every system in our state. It takes my breath away. I thank you for that. I thank you for the intent and thoughtfulness that has gone into kicking this off during Suicide Prevention Week, and to make that available, and the encouragement, because I'm seeing the messages that are going out to each and every system, to send teachers, to send those school personnel to be there and to really address this. I'm very aware, personally, of a situation that happened, I believe it was about the second day of school this year, and it is something we cannot pause or wait on, because some of our children are very desperate and do not have time to think through this. So thank you once again. I'm sure we'll be hearing from you more as we go through this, and it is so nice though to hear all of these different elements and how they are working together, and how the silos are beginning to come down in the delivery to our children. So thank you very much. Our next presenter is Matt Yancey, as referred to earlier from Dr. McGivney, the Director of the Office of Children, Young Adults, and Family with the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities. Matt, take a few minutes and tell us a little more about yourself, because I know there's much more.
Well, good morning, Madam Chair, members of the council. Thank you for having me. And it's great to be here. It's an honor. It's an honor to be with, I think, so many colleagues and partners and advocates who I feel like are deeply interested in being a part of the solution to some of these challenges, and helping play a role in creating a stronger system of care. I must say this is the second or third time I've had to follow Dr. McGivney in doing presentations, and it's always a little overwhelming. He's already left. Oh, there he is. But I will do my best to keep the momentum going. A quick background on me personally. I graduated from Berry College, also known as the Harvard of the South, and graduated on a Saturday and started with Floyd County Department of Family and Children's Services on that Monday, and have been in government roles ever since. Spent 5 years with DFACS, spent 6 years with the Cobb County School District, initially as a school social worker, and then I led a project called Success for All Students that I'll talk about a little later. Prior to coming to the Department of Behavioral Health, I was with the Department of Public Health, and that's where I really learned the value of the public health model, and we'll certainly talk about that this morning as well. So my agenda is pretty simple this morning. There's two goals. The first is to provide a cursory overview on what we do at DBHDD and the Office of Children, Young Adults, and Families. And the second part of the agenda is to talk about our vision for moving forward, some of the efforts that we have launched in the past year, and certainly discussion about where we hope to go. I always start my presentations with this quote, because if you're like me, you kind of carry these things with you and it motivates you daily. It's easier to build strong children than repair broken men. And I think, knowing some of my team members are here, this is kind of what motivates us. We feel strongly that the work that we are doing is going to pay huge dividends when children become adults. We are motivated by creating strong, independent, and resilient youth. Our target population. So our primary targeted population are uninsured, indigent children and youth in Georgia. One would argue that they are probably the most vulnerable children in our state. The children that we work with have what we refer to as serious emotional disturbances, more commonly referred to as mental health issues. These are children that have diagnosable mental health disorders, which results in a functional impairment in the way they live in their community, in the way they function in their schools, in the way they interact with their families. We have recently expanded our focus to the emerging adult population, and I'll talk a little more about that later on in the presentation on why that is critically important for the state of Georgia. And of course, you can't talk about working with children and youth with mental health needs without talking about engaging their families. They are such an important part of the conversation, and no child is going to be successful unless their family is there with them throughout the course of treatment and recovery. Our primary service is what we refer to as core services. DBHDD manages a large network of providers, and there are approximately 150 child and adolescent providers throughout the state, the majority of which reside in our Region 3, which is the metro Atlanta area. These providers provide a whole host of services critical to a child with mental health needs. Those range from the initial evaluation and assessment to diagnosis, ongoing counseling and therapy, medication management. And these services are provided in various arenas, ranging from their clinics to their homes to their schools and other community settings. This most recent fiscal year, over 25,000 of our targeted youth receive community-based services. One of the things that we do that I think is unique to the state of Georgia are the mental health clubhouses. And I would strongly encourage the committee to take a visit to one of the clubhouses throughout the state. These are really special environments that provide a safe, nurturing, natural environment for children with serious emotional disturbances. People often ask me, how are these environments different than a Boys and Girls Club? How are they different than the after-school program at the local elementary school? And I often respond with that the difference is that these children are the ones who are often kicked out of those programs. And the clubhouse environment provides that place where they won't be kicked out, and they will be welcomed and provided support around employment services, family engagement, social activities, all things that we know are critical for a child in managing their symptoms. This past fiscal year, close to 600 youth throughout the state were a clubhouse member. And I think most notable amongst that statistic is that approximately 98% of them, while there at the clubhouse, did not necessitate a higher level of care. These kids are not going to crisis stabilization units, are not going to emergency rooms, are not going to PRTFs. So we, I think, have figured something out with this model. And I'll talk a little more later about our vision for growing it throughout the state. This is a picture of the Chris Kids Clubhouse. Chris Kids is here in the Atlanta area. And this clubhouse is unique in that it serves co-occurring young adults and youth ages 16 to 21. This picture is actually from this past May. We were honored to have the First Lady come out and visit with us. And I think she probably spent close to 2 hours talking to each young person in the clubhouse. And it was just really a special day for the members of the clubhouse. I mentioned earlier our psychiatric residential treatment facilities. There are 7 what we refer to as PRTFs in the state of Georgia. You can see the list here. Half of the PRTFs are in the metro area. We are fortunate to have providers who offer this service in Savannah, Augusta, as well as Macon. This is our highest level of care in Georgia. These are the children that have extremely high acuity, and we have done everything possible to treat that child and keep them in the home environment. Children who go to our PRTFs are generally there for 6 to 9 months. It is our most deep-in service in the state. Care management entities. This is another unique program here in Georgia that really aims to keep children out of PRTFs. It focuses and targets on those youth that have that level of acuity, that level of need. And in lieu of them going to a facility, being moved out of the home, they are treated right there in the home environment through wraparound services, what we call high-fidelity wraparound, an evidence-based model that's used throughout the country. There are 2 care management entities that provide the wraparound work, those being Viewpoint Health and Lookout Mountain. And these services are provided statewide and have been proven nationally and in Georgia to produce pretty significant outcomes. This most recent fiscal year, 97% of young people that receive this service do not require PRTF services. We have done a lot of research and studies on this work. We have landed that children who receive care management entity services, there's a savings of $40,000 per year. This is significant work, and we are fortunate to have this service in Georgia because it keeps kids in their most natural environment, and that's with their family. A very significant piece of our work with the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities is ensuring a strong crisis continuum. We know that children and youth with mental health needs, they often find themselves in crisis. I find it interesting that a lot of folks that I talk to are not aware that Georgia has mobile crisis services. So anywhere in the state of Georgia, if you are in crisis, you can call the Georgia Crisis and Access Line, and a mobile team will be at your location on average within an hour. And that's pretty significant when you consider the geography of our state. Our office also funds 4 crisis stabilization units, one in Greenville, which is the LaGrange area, Lakeside, which is down in the Savannah area. We have a CSU in Macon, Georgia, and one in Viewpoint. At Viewpoint here in Decatur, there are 71 crisis stabilization unit beds funded by the Department of Behavioral Health. We also have agreements with other private facilities to ensure that there's increased bed availability for children in crisis. In FY15, over 1,400 children and youth received crisis service activity. Project Launch. I think Project Launch is very well connected to some of the things that Dr. McGibney was referencing earlier. This is another SAMHSA grant that has engaged the Georgia Department of Public Health. And I am really excited to be a partner with Public Health on this initiative because it's all about ensuring that children enter school ready. Yeah, I mentioned I was a school social worker years ago, and I cannot tell you the amount of time I spent with kindergarten teachers because there were so many kids coming to school that would spend weeks, if not months, hiding under their desk, throwing chairs, and they were at a loss. So I think to earlier points made, we know we have to intervene earlier. Through this initiative, we are focusing on Muskogee County, there in Columbus, and we're building cross-cutting partnerships to ensure that children are identified earlier and that they get the help they need earlier. This is obviously a step in the right direction. This is my favorite slide, not because Sue Smith is here in the audience and will be presenting later. It's so interesting. I have the great fortune to go around a lot of places, even outside of the state, to talk about the great work happening in Georgia. And usually within the first 2 minutes of any conversation, people ask me how Sue Smith is doing. Sue is the leader for the Georgia Parent Support Network. And as I mentioned earlier, you can't serve these children without serving their families. And in Georgia, we know you can best support these families by engaging the Georgia Parent Support Network. They have been in existence since 1989, and through our partnership, we are expanding the local federation of family chapters throughout the state, GPSN being the state chapter. We're supporting, in partnership with other folks like DOE, increased mental health awareness. We're developing youth move chapters throughout the state. The youth voice is so powerful in what we do, and GPSN plays a very important role in our system of care. Speaking of system of care, our department plays really a lead role in ensuring that we have a coordinated system here in Georgia. We do that through several ways, 3 of which I'll mention this morning, one of which is the local interagency planning teams, often referred to as the LIPTs. This is another a group of folks I would encourage the committee to visit. There are teams throughout the state that work with families individually to get them the services they need. And I firmly believe that's the best way to do it. Local communities know local families best. And we have LIPTs throughout the state that are, in essence, the microcosm of system of care. We also have the interagency directors team. Some of the members are actually here with us this morning. I'll never forget when I was working on the community level, I used to get a little bamboozled by folks on the state level, and it's interesting that here I am. But I would think to myself, there's got to be maybe 5 to 10 people who can really make some change throughout the state and fix some of the things that we know need to be fixed. It's the Georgia Interagency Directors team. This team has representation, director-level representation from every child and family service organization in the state, from DFACS to DPH to DCH, DBHDD. We have amazing partnerships through the IDT, with the Carter Center, with the CDC. This is a powerful group of folks that have made some significant changes in our system. And we certainly play a role in moving the IDT forward. This year, the focus for the interagency directors team will be access. And we've talked a little bit about access already this morning. The other part of our work is with the Georgia Center of Excellence for Children's Behavioral Health. We are fortunate to have Georgia State University here in our backyard to partner with to ensure that all the services that we just discussed are implemented with fidelity, that they're reaching the outcomes we're hoping to achieve. The Center of Excellence, or the COE as we call it, also play a role in training our workforce in the high-fidelity wraparound model that we know yields amazing outcomes, training our workforce in a trauma-informed system of care. This is a core partner to our department. So at this point, I'm going to shift gears just a little and pivot to a vision moving forward. And for me, there are two kind of driving forces on how we need to move forward within our office, within our department. One of which is our vision. And I will say our department has amazing leadership. And I think everyone in our department is connected by this vision right here. And we all know it. We all know it's increasing access to high-quality care. And the two phrases, the two words here that really jumped out at me was access and high-quality care. So from day one, since joining the department, I have focused on those two words. The other thing that has really motivated me to make some changes is that famous public health parable about the river. And for those of you who may not know it, it's simply we have all of us have been standing alongside the riverbanks waiting for kids to come down. And I think we have one by one tried to pull these kids out of the river. And it is exhausting. It doesn't often work. And at some point, I think we have to make a decision to walk upstream to see where they're coming from. And as the story goes, when you walk upstream, you'll find the picture on the screen. You'll find a bridge that is in repair, need of repair, that's broken. So we have certainly, in the past year, have teamed with other partners to figure out how we can make the system stronger and reach kids earlier before they end down the river. I have, and these are not my ideas. These 6 kind of key steps are results of hours and hours of conversations with other agencies, with advocates, and this is where we landed on as far as key things that should be done here in Georgia. And I'll provide detail for each. Adopting a public health approach, building capacity for school-based mental health services, expanding the aforementioned mental health clubhouse model, institutionalizing parent and youth peer support services, recalibrating on transition-age youth and young adults, and last but not least, strengthening the behavioral health workforce. So we talk about the public health approach. We had a really great System of Care Academy a couple of months ago. We had maybe 600 people there. And one of the speakers came out of the gate, and I'll never forget him saying this. He said, "We cannot treat ourselves out of this problem. And that just really stuck with me, and it really resonated, I think, along these lines of adopting a public health approach to the children's mental health issue. We all know there's significant miseducation and misinformation around children's mental health. We know that people assume that a child with mental health is going to be a child that walks into a school with a loaded gun. That's not true. Children with mental health are more likely to be victimized than to be an aggressor. We have to get people talking about mental health and talking about the facts. I think the Jason Flack Act is a perfect example of work that needs to be done. We are taking universal steps to ensure that people are educated about mental health and know how to respond and know how to get kids help when they need it. We in the department have recently created a new Office of Mental Health Promotion. I think that demonstrates our commitment to promoting positive mental health and moving away from us being seen as just the treatment organization. This next slide, I think, and it speaks to some of the data Dr. McGivney spoke about earlier. 1 in 5 kids has a mental health diagnosis, 1 in 5. And very few of them get the treatment they need. And I often think to myself, if less than 20% of kids in Georgia who have cancer got the help they need, it would be a public outcry. And, you know, I personally think that this is not a public health issue, it's a public health crisis. We've got a lot of kids who need help, and we've got to make sure they get the help they need. School-based mental health services, I think, are part of that answer. Dr. McGivney talked about a lot of the foundational things that are happening within schools around school climate, school culture, training staff in youth mental health first aid, training them in recognizing suicidal ideation. There's also another piece to it that I think is critical, and that's at the top of this pyramid. That's the actual direct service delivery for kids who have a diagnosable mental health need. And what we have done with the department this past year is provide 29 providers throughout the state with seed money to begin hiring staff, and these being licensed mental health professionals, licensed clinical social workers, others, to be strategically placed in schools within their catchment area. And, you know, I'll share with you an email that I received from a provider down in South Georgia that we have recently funded with the school-based mental health grant. And she writes, while I have you, our APEX staff attended 2 of our schools' pre-planning faculty meetings. Both therapists were given standing ovations when they simply introduced themselves to the faculty. They are being treated just as as any school staff member would be, and the faculty want to know how can they get more of them. And she goes on to write in all capital letters, goosebumps. This is going to be the start of something powerful. Again, I don't think this is the silver bullet, but I think all efforts that we can make to leverage the community providers in the state and form these partnerships at the local level between the providers and the schools to address the access issue will lead to very, very positive outcomes. When I was with Cobb County School District, we did exactly this. And we brought, I think, 30 individual professionals into 25 targeted schools, and they were there for 5 years. We served close to 2,000 kids. All that work was evaluated by Georgia State. We saw significant decreases in absences, improved attendance. It has a huge impact because that's where kids are. The mental health clubhouses, this is another effort that we are expanding. I mentioned earlier there are currently 6 in Georgia. We are expanding them to 12. New locations for the clubhouses include Douglas County, Bartow County, Newton County, Thomas County there in South Georgia, Lawrence County in Middle Georgia, and Muskogee County. This is part of the answer. We have to continue to provide environments where kids feel safe and they get the supplemental services they need to live a life of recovery down the road. You can see here some of the data in 2014. 79% of the youth demonstrated improved functioning who were going to the clubhouses. Parent and youth peer support. I tell you, Georgia has been a leader in peer support for a long time. I think that's something we can really celebrate, is the work that we've done around peer support for adults. A few years ago, we wised up to think we need to do the same exact thing for kids. And we are creating family peer support services as we speak, youth peer support services. We are taking those with lived experience and leveraging them to work with young people who are going through these challenges now. And this is really important for our system. We know that peer support improves knowledge of the disorders that children may be affected with. It improves self-efficacy. It improves self-care. It reduces emergency services. This is part of our future, and I'm really excited to see where it goes. I talked a little bit about transition age youth and young adults, and I think this little picture kind of sums up what happens when you turn 18. You go to get help, and people go like this. And we've got to figure out better ways to serve that vulnerable population, because it's not always the adult system that best serves a 19-year-old, a 20-year-old. We are piloting a new initiative that targets this population around first episode psychosis. There are 3 providers in the state that we are training in this coordinated specialty care model that is evidence-based, has been used throughout the country. This is just one example of work that we need to do around this population. We are creating new toolkits, looking at policies across all child-serving agencies, because this is a specialized population. The emerging adult work is and should remain an area of focus. And last, the behavioral health workforce. One of the things that really stuck with me that Commissioner Berry said early on when I joined the department is that we are only as strong as our network of providers. So we at DBHDD have really prioritized providing training and support to our provider network. This year we'll be working with providers around secondary trauma. We know that the turnover amongst providers is significant. The research shows that part of the reason that people leave is because the exposure to that trauma of the clients they're serving, that secondary exposure. We're also working with more of our deep end services around crisis and de-escalation training, and we'll continue to offer events throughout the year, such as the System of Care Academy and the upcoming Behavioral Health Symposium. So just to recap, these are 6 areas that the council may want to explore further. These are areas that we, as a department and an office, have really prioritized. Again, public health approach, school-based mental health, looking at the mental health clubhouses, peer support, that emerging adult population, and thinking broadly around how we can make sure that Georgia has the strongest provider network in the country. That's my presentation, and I'll be glad to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's excellent steps that are being taken. Are there any questions or comments from the committee members?
Thank you for a great presentation, Matt, and for taking on the importance of children in our mental health system. And I love your idea of inclusiveness that looks at the public health model. You talk a lot about the services you're providing, but not really, I didn't get a very good understanding of the need. So to what percentage of the need do you think you're reaching?
Yes, a great question. I think there's interesting data around how many kids who need help get it. And as we talked about earlier, it's not as many as we know. In public health, we often refer to certain areas of the state as food deserts. We did a lot of work with the governor's childhood obesity campaign, Georgia's Shape. And it's interesting, if you look at those areas of the state, that the best meal you can get is a cheeseburger and a side order of fries. Those are the same areas where you have limited clinicians, limited psychiatrists. It's a challenge. One of the things that I neglected to mention, Representative, is that we are working closely with DCH, with DPH around that topic of telemedicine. I think we have to look at how we can utilize that technology to ensure that kids who need the help get it, because there's certainly kids who need it that we know still are not getting it because the closest clinician is 40, 50 miles away. And so many of these families, they have the transportation barriers, they have other issues that impact the child getting what they need. So I can't speak to specific data on that. I can only conjecture based on national data that there are kids that we know still need help, and we've got to get it to them.
So are you meeting half the need, a quarter of the need?
I really couldn't speak to that.
Okay.
I don't know.
My other question has to do with DCH and the CMOs, and the innovative programs that you've described are very exciting, both you and Dr. McGivney. And how does that, I mean, they can't exist without getting paid.
That's right.
So how does it work with the Medicaid system, and is there some way that we can help with that?
I think that's a great question. We have a very, very strong partnership with our state Medicaid authority, and most if not all of the services that I described, ranging from youth and parent peer support to the wraparound services, are being pushed forward in the state Medicaid plan. So these will be services that will be Medicaid, I say Medicaidable is probably not the most appropriate term, but will be billable moving forward. And I think if not for the partnership that we have with DCH, that would not have happened. We have worked extremely close with community health around our care management entities, and again, the wraparound services. And that will be going in the state Medicaid plan, and we have coined it intensive customized care coordination. So with the exception of the clubhouses, these services.
About the clubhouses, so they're not willing to support that.
I can't say if they're not willing, but I think we have certainly prioritized the peer support services and the care management services.
And do you know in the contract the CMOs are probably getting new contracts? Is there language that requires them to provide these kinds of services?
Right. I can't speak to what's in their actual contract. I can say that in the request for proposal, these services were discussed. And the expectation was that the care management organizations come up with plans on how to offer them.
Great. Thank you.
Any other questions? Representative Jaspers?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Matt. On those mental health clubhouses, okay, how do young people get recommended to those? What's the process to?
It's a great question. So the clubhouses are run by our community services boards. We have partnerships with them to create the clubhouses and staff the clubhouses. The children that attend these go through the same intake process as they would normally to get standard behavioral health services. And this is seen as an additional treatment option for children that are in the provider world. Generally speaking, if not in all cases, these children have a diagnosable mental health disorder. They are receiving some type of therapy. They're receiving, in many cases, psychiatric services. But what the providers are doing is offering this as a supplement to those standard core services that a child may receive. So in short, that's how they get involved with the clubhouses, is through the front door of the community services boards that operate the clubhouses.
Are most of them housed at a school? Where are they housed at? What's their?
They're generally standalone buildings, and I think each community has a different environment. One of the clubhouses that we fund is up in Tiger, Georgia, and it's an old house, an older home, and I don't know if I think it's like a log cabin, and so the providers have gotten really creative. The clubhouse here in DeKalb at Chris Kids is a separate building from their organization. It just varies based on community, but one of the things that we have done as a department is really provide the providers and the community the autonomy to find the best place based on where schools are located, where access is needed.
I have another one, Madam Chair, if I can.
Yes.
Just following up on Representative Gardner's just path of thought, I looked at the residential treatment facilities. I'm just curious, how many young people do we have that participates, not appropriate word, but that's what I'll use, in those each year? What's their number of?
Yeah, that's a great question. So looking at the children that we are funded to serve, those indigent, uninsured children, we have seen a decrease for various reasons. On average, I would say up until recent years, there are probably 500 or so children a year that receive PRTF services of our core consumer, and we've seen a steady decline in recent years.
What is it? I'm full of questions.
No, that's okay.
But like in the cost, what does it cost us to keep someone or treat them 6 to 9 months in the facility?
It's a big investment by the state. On average, and I don't want to speak incorrectly, but I want to say it's close to $450, $500 a day for that in-treatment service, which I think, in my opinion, really reinforces the need to treat children where they are, because they are costly. They're costly services. And many of these children require 2-on-1 supervision. So throughout the day, they have someone there with them providing supervision, working with them throughout the day. And certainly there's cost associated to that.
Well, that's where you get the next thing was that care maintenance and the care management entities, where it saved you so much. Mm-hmm. How many kids do we have that are involved in the care management entities? That's the next thing you talked about,
right? In
there, what's the numbers of young people there?
I think I may have included that. Maybe I did not. On average, Representative, there's similar to the PRTF numbers, 500 or so kids a year that receive services through the care management entities. And again, these are children that meet that level of care, but they're given the option. The parent is given the option for wraparound services in their home.
So it'd be a child with the same issues, but one may go to the residential and one may be in the home.
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay. Gotcha there. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Could you address the decline that, as you said, in the PRTFs? I think
Well, it's certainly a decline within our purview. I think with the transition of the foster care population to Amerigroup, we have seen a natural decline there. And I also think the decline has contributed to more and more kids receiving the care management services. We're seeing that parents want to keep their children in their home, and through that service, they're not having to go into a PRTF.
Okay, great, thank you. Representative Gardner.
Just one last thing. I did visit the Chris Kids. Was very impressed with the quality of the services that are provided there. And at the risk of sounding parochial, I represent Fulton County. We have no CSB, so their ability to bill for those services without a CSB is hindered, and I'd ask for your help in helping resolve that.
Sure. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I don't see any other questions. Thank you for another excellent presentation to begin this conversation. I really appreciate the great work that's being done, and there's always no doubt we can do more, but I thank you for this. We will, I'm sure, hear from you again down the road.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to ask y'all to hang with us. We've got 3 more presenters. They are brief, but they are very important to sort of kick us off today. So the first one is Ellen Yeager. Ellen, the Director of Public Policy and Advocacy for Mental Health America of Georgia. We've already heard probably mention of all 3 of the entities that we're going to hear from in the earlier presentations.
So first I want to just thank you for being here. This is a wonderful opportunity for us to talk about children's mental health. I also want you to know from a very personal point of view how important this topic is to me. I was diagnosed at 16 with the first mental health diagnosis. I went on to receive more. My son was diagnosed at 6, and it was an interesting experience sharing his youth and growing up. And I want you to know, though, that kids can be so resilient that his diagnosis did not deter him from the outcome that he experienced. He's now a mental health clinician who, in fact, works with kids who have mental illness. So we know that recovery is possible for all these kids, and given the right supports, these kids are resilient. The new challenge our family faces is that my granddaughter, his daughter, is also challenged with a variety of illnesses. One of them is a very rare disorder, but behavioral health issues run through it. And it's really important to me and to my son that she has the same opportunities and is not just seen as an individual with a disability, but is seen as an individual, and that her voice is heard. So talking about lived experience, I think it's essential that we remember we have to engage these kids. Matt talked about the peer work that's being done, and the work that's being done is wonderful, but it's not enough. And we still are not bringing families and people with lived experience to the table at the rate they need to be included in the conversation. You know, following both Gary and Matt is no great chore, no great thing. It's a serious chore here, and I'm not going to be uplifting the way they were, although I certainly appreciate everything they said and am really inspired by some of the work that's being done. I can also tell you that the crisis we're experiencing is overwhelming. Money is stagnant. There is no new money for children's mental health services. We know 45% of the kids in the Department of Juvenile Justice have a mental health diagnosis. We know that an average classroom is very large, and children who do have a diagnosis or don't have a diagnosis, but in fact are acting out the symptoms of a mental illness, are really challenged to function in the school system. We know these kids are dropping out at a very high rate. We know they are flunking out at a very high rate. We know there's a system, it's not actually a school, but a program called GNETS, which you will get to hear about, where 5,000 of our kids are not being nurtured. It's just the opposite. They are not being given the opportunity to live in recovery and become the kind of people they probably would like to be. We talked about younger kids, and I can't emphasize enough how important that is. But before kids go to school, they live in a family. And that family quite often does not have the resources or the knowledge to understand what a mental illness is. And if we don't start looking at education, whether it's youth mental health first aid or other opportunities, but we have got to give these parents the tools to understand the difference between what I call a typical kid and a kid who is developing a mental health challenge. It is not uncommon for a period of 10 years to go by for a child who is starting to show symptoms for the actual diagnosis and treatment to occur. There is no other illness where that is true. A 10-year period is a lifetime for a young person. The funding stream in itself is a discussion that could probably take up all 4 of your meetings, because funding cannot be looked at in terms of what institution gets the funding, but what are the services the child needs. And so we have to look at what's the outcome that we really want, not where the service is provided. And so the funding really has to follow the child through the child's needs. And that would make a tremendous difference. It is hard, once you receive a lump sum of money, to give that money up. And so whether it is the best used money or not is not necessarily the discussion, you know, and so we really do have to look at how is the money following the kid and what new monies can we put into early intervention and prevention. I gave you some information about kids at risk, and we do know that kids are at high risk when they have certain conditions or certain circumstances. Poverty is certainly a circumstance where you're going to see kids at a higher risk. And yet, you know, we're not talking about poverty. We're not talking about kids who are really in need of so much. They come into the school lacking the proper clothing, the proper nutrition, the proper parenting. It's just so many issues, and the schools cannot, you know, be a magic place. So we have to start before these kids even get into a school environment. And we have to do that, with families and with parents. We have to look at the fact that meds are being used in place of mental health professionals. We don't have a professional, let's put the kid on meds. Who's overseeing these meds? What meds are they? A lot of kids are on psychotropic drugs that an adult cannot tolerate, and yet they're on 1, 2, 3 different meds. Who's overseeing them? It's just ongoing. So much of what I wanted to share with you, you have heard. I was, again, delighted to hear some of the very positive things that both Gary and Matt talked about. But we have to be very realistic about the kids who are in need right now. And we have to look at what we can do now. I'm not popular at parties because this is a very favorite topic of mine. And it's hard to get people excited. But I'll give you a perfect example of stigma and discrimination of children with a mental illness. Back some years ago, when the paper talked about Sarah Kreider and the fact that she died in an institution that was run by the state, there was no outcry, none. No one talked about it. And if it hadn't been the fact that the state ultimately was sued, there probably would have been no discussion. The next day, there was an article in the paper, big article, about someone who was arrested because he had mistreated his puppy. And it really broke my heart to see that Sarah Kreider didn't get the same interest. We accepted what her outcome was, but there seemed to be an absolute outcry for the puppy. And so our whole attitude about children and children with special needs really has to change. We really have to address the stigma and the discrimination. I really hope that this committee will gather all its information and look at how you have ongoing dialogue. This won't be completed in 4 or 5 meetings. It won't be completed in 4 or 5 months. There really needs to be an opportunity for families and young people with lived experience, as well as mental health professionals and educators, to really move the process forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Ellen? Well, I thank you. And you have challenged us in this arena, as always, and are such a strong advocate and meaningful voice with, as you say, a very personal story. So I thank you for that.
Sue actually had to leave because she had another commitment.
Oh, I am so sorry. Well, we will bring her back at the next.
Bring her back, and she also will have a family member and a young person.
That'll be great. So we had on our agenda Sue Smith from Georgia Parent Support Network, and I know that was mentioned in some of our earlier presenters' comments as what a strong partner they are. So next, we will hear from Tally Wells, the Director of Disability Integration Project with the Atlanta Legal Aid Society. And Tally, you might just take a few minutes while the clock is ticking, and we're getting close to 12. I think we can keep everybody here a few minutes if we must, but if you would at least begin the conversation, as we've said about all of this. There's much more to tackle as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Representative Dempsey and representatives, I am so honored and pleased that you are holding this study committee, because children's mental health is such a critical issue, as you know, to your districts and to this state. And it matters not just for this year, but for the lifetime of so many of our children. And I am coming to you today to talk about a very specific opportunity we have as a state, and that is to focus in on our GNETS program and the issues that are there with that program, and the children who are there, because it's 5,000 children, 90% who have been labeled as having an emotional behavior diagnosis. Before I do that, I want to make sure to introduce Craig Goodmark, who is my colleague from the Atlanta Legal Aid Society, and Leslie Lipson from the Georgia Advocacy Office, who are real experts on GNETs and have advocated for students and children in this program for years and years and years, and can answer any questions that you have as well as I can. I have a client who I am going to have an IEP meeting for at a GNETs program in a week. He went to a GNETs program in 3rd grade. He had witnessed a shooting, and he really suffered some horrific trauma from that. And he is now 15 years old. He went in 3rd grade. He never came out. He's in 15 at the GNETs. He has not ever received any coordinated behavioral health services. He is now being directed by the Department of Juvenile Justice and a judge to go get some mental health services, but it's just not happening in his school. And I'm going to talk about what the GNETs is, how there was an audit of the GNETs program in 2010 by the state of Georgia that found some real questions about the effectiveness of the GNETs program, the cost effectiveness of it. Then in July, 1 month ago, this state and our governor received a findings letter from the United States Department of Justice finding issues with our GNETs program that I'm going to discuss, and specifically finding that this program is in violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And then I'll end with some conclusions. I do want to say, though, that this is an opportunity. The Justice Department came, and nobody was happy that the Justice Department came and looked at our adult mental health system. And they came after the Sarah Kreider article that Ellen discussed. But what happened, and what was really wonderful, was it was the Georgia stakeholders. And the Georgia Department, at that time it was the Department of Human Resources, it became the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities, got together, and they spoke together, and they talked about how can we come up with a really positive resolution. And what ended up in that settlement were really things that we had worked out together. The crown jewel of the DOJ adult settlement is supported housing. That is, there are 2,300 people right now because of that settlement and because your investment as the legislature who are in housing, who are following the Housing First model. We have become, because of this housing that is happening, because of the case management and the other services that we work together to come up with, lives are changing. People are no longer in the hospitals, no longer in as much stress. They have moved along in their recovery journeys, and we have really done it together. And that's what we've got to do about this GNETs issue. Yes, the feds are shining a light on it, but the real answer has to come from us. Some quick key points about the GNETs program. There are 24 educational placements throughout the state where children, mostly with the label of emotional behavior disorder, attend. I put in here diagnosis, and I was corrected because these are not medical diagnoses. These are eligibility criteria that are in the special education law. As I said last month, the Justice Department sent a findings letter to the governor saying that this program is in violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. The Americans with Disabilities Act, specifically, it was signed by the first President Bush, and it says that people with disabilities have the right to receive services in the most integrated setting appropriate to their needs. And in the historical findings at the very start, Congress, and it was very much a bipartisan Congress, found that for most of our American history, we had segregated people with disabilities in institutions. Sometimes they were sent there for very good reasons. Most of the time, they never got out, and that it's segregation. And that was a system that maybe worked in the 19th century, but we're in the 21st century, and it is not the system that we should have today. And what the Justice Department found is that this GNETS program basically takes kids with an emotional behavioral disorder label and sends them to a program where the only kids there are kids with disabilities, and that is segregation. Most of these programs are in separate facilities. Some are within the schools, but even if they're within the schools, they eat lunch separately, they go to a separate place, and there is no question that all the other kids in the school know that they are the GNETS kids. And it's a kind of label that you just can't get out of. And what the DOJ findings letter found is that it's very hard to get back into the schools. And in fact, they expect, what the DOJ found was that they expect better behavior than you'd expect from other kids in the regular schools. As I said, the 2010 audit questioned the effectiveness and the cost effectiveness. It specifically said that the Department of Education was not able to show that these kids had better behavior and better academic performance. So right now, we heard some wonderful projects that are getting launched, and these are very, very hopeful projects. I never hear anything bad about Matt Yancey. He is doing extraordinary work over at the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities. But as Ellen said, you gotta fund it. It's gotta be coordinated, and if it's really gonna work. And that's what we have to do in response to this GNETS issue, because the fact of the matter is that these programs are in violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. These kids need to come back to their schools, but they need to come back in a way that's going to work, in a way that where we have a coordinated mental health system, like some of the programs we heard today. All of these children, these 5,000 children, and all of the children who in the future would go to this program are going to need a coordinated, well-funded, robust array of mental health services in addition to their education. I'll go through the rest of my slides quickly. This is the audit, and specifically the finding from the Georgia Department of Audits. And I put this in. I'll let you look at it at your leisure, how the funding works of the GNETS program. It's mostly state funding. And local schools do sometimes kick in, but they don't have to. 10% graduated with a regular diploma, according to the 2010 audit. This is the statute that Matt Yancey talked about. Yes, there is a good program of the system of care in terms of bringing the leadership together. No, the coordination between the schools and the department in every single school for every kid with a mental health diagnosis is nowhere near happening. This is a statute that really provides a lot of hope, but not yet enough action in terms of really coordinating between DDHED and particularly the Department of Education, but also the Department of Juvenile Justice and all of the other departments that are involved in children's mental health. As I said, the letter came last month from the Department of Justice. I have shared it with Roma and all of you. I'm happy to get a copy to you. Essentially, it says that putting kids with disabilities in one program or one building is segregation, and it violates the ADA. So the Justice Department suggests creating and executing a plan to integrate these students, providing the necessary supports in the local schools, and then reaching out to families and students to make sure they know what services are available. So what's going to happen next with the GNETS program? Well, they're either going to litigate, or they're going to settle, or they're going to litigate and settle. And I think this is an opportunity. This is, yes, this could get a little messy, but these are 5,000 of our Georgia children, and we really need to work together to ensure that they get the supports and services they need, and they need it now, because I got an 8-year-old, and she was totally different when she was 7, and she was totally different when she was 6, and it happens so fast, all of these kids growing up. I mean, the young man I'm representing right now at 15, it was just 6 years ago. He was a 3rd grader, and that's how quickly this happens. It is my conclusion that the GNETS program must end because it doesn't work as shown by the Department of Education. It violates the Americans with Disabilities Act. We need to take this opportunity to get these students back in the regular schools and give them what they need so they can become productive citizens in our state for their entire lives, as opposed to the costs that we will all pay if they're not. We need to coordinate our mental health system and really follow this statute. We need funding. And one of the things that I've heard offline, I don't hear it online, but when I hear offline, is that the CMO's system is a problem for the children's mental health because DBHDD doesn't have the funding to provide these services. And if you're really going to get them into the schools, if you're really going to have a coordinated system as required by Georgia law, it's difficult with the CMO system. And if you're going to do it, then I guess you got to stick them in this coordinating council because they really need to be part of this whole thing. But my recommendation is that DBHDD get that money because they do, as Matt Yancey said, have very strong leadership. But you can only do so much with what you got. And Medicaid does, as we all know, pay 2/3 of the funding. And so, as Matt said, there's a lot of new services coming out. We got to keep rolling those services out for mental health because it's so necessary. And we have to get it into the local schools. And finally, one of the biggest concerns I have is what happened sort of in Rome with the hospital, is that we were rolling out services at the same time we closed the hospital. Whether or not you were for closing the hospital, I was, but I was not for it without the services for all of the people to get in the community. And we have got to get this right. If we close the GNETs, we have got to make sure that all of these children get the supports and services they need in the local schools. Because I tell you what, if my client goes back right now, he's not going to stay in his local school very long without the supports and services he needs. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a hard message to hear. I want to address the fact that today it was not ignored by the Department of Education or DBHDD, as we talked about, Tally, because of the posture that this is in right now. They cannot speak to it, but are very concerned and are very active in the work. I thank you for your framing this as an opportunity. A lot of, I guess all the years I've been involved in this, there's been a lot of opportunity if we look at it that way. But I've seen some great success come from those challenges that we've faced. You may not, I don't even know if you're aware that Rome is my home.
I am.
Okay, yeah, so, get me in the heart right there if you want to. There are good things that have come from that. The journey through it was hard and painful, and still very hard and painful for my own community, and that must never, ever be neglected. And hopefully we will all do all we can to never see a repeat of that type of incident the way it was handled. So I thank you also for stressing that. Are there any questions from the committee? Representative Gardner.
I have one, and we always are looking for ways to pay for these services. And for years, I've heard people talk about EPSDT as part of Medicaid and how they have federal authority and responsibility to provide diagnosis and treatment for children under the EPSDT program, but that it's never it's always underutilized. And I wondered if you had in your experience some ideas about how we might help DCH figure out a way to better utilize. I mean, is it that the payment rates are too low, or that are...
Well, I'm looking at that issue specifically with respect to clients I have with developmental disabilities, and the fact that we still have the 7,000 person waiting list. And if they're children, and I keep hearing the same thing that you hear, which is that EPSDT can provide them
Could do it.
what they need, how do you do it? And one of the realities is that the procedures for sort of providing that, for the doctor to actually sort of recommend it. And then the biggest issue that I see, so I've sort of figured that out, but I get my doctor to write an order, and then where does he send it? And then once he writes that order, who's actually going to provide that service? And one of the biggest issues that I think I put in my PowerPoint but I didn't say is the necessity of really looking at how the providers have the people to actually provide these services, and that's a huge issue on the children's mental health. So I think that I've looked at that law. It says what you hear. It says that anything that that Medicaid provides, not only in Georgia but throughout the country, if a doctor says it's medically necessary, they have to provide it. But the actual sort of getting from here to there is what we've got to all figure out. And Josh Norris, who's here, has a lot of expertise in this area as well.
So are the barriers federal or state?
State.
And there are state regulations as opposed to state law?
It's state manuals. It's and not. I mean, it's one of those chicken and the egg things too, right? If you don't pay for it, how do you have the providers to provide it? And so it's going from sort of the concept of the fact that you have this right to how doctors even know that they can provide it. Do doctors want to do it? Doctors aren't always excited to talk to me. I'm a lawyer. And then how do you actually get it provided? And so I think that it takes a real hard conversation with the Department of Community Health, who is always strapped in all sorts of ways to really make this happen. And then, of course, with children, most of them are in the CMOs, and so how that...
But two-thirds would be paid by the feds.
Two-thirds would be paid by the feds. I think it's 66.9% right now would be paid by the feds.
Well, we'll count on you to help us figure out where those barriers are.
And I'm getting a note here that the Department of Education does not bill Medicaid all the time, and so they could. So there are funding ways that, if we look at it in lots of different ways, that we could probably open up the spigots.
Oops. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you.
Thank you.
So the conversation has begun, and it's big, and it's huge. And we're going to go to work on it. I promise you that. I thank each of you that are here today. I look forward to hearing from some of you as we go down this road. There's a lot of information and knowledge and experience that I know is sitting out there in those pews right now, so I look forward to that. We plan to have another meeting either late September or early in October. If you are not on the distribution list and want to be, please reach out and let me have your information. You can send it to my email, my office, and we will make sure you are there. If there's someone else that you feel should be here that is not, we are open to ideas. We've got a lot of them, but no meeting is in concrete right now. So if there's someone you think that could help us, I thank you very much for sending it forward. Y'all have a very good day and work hard.